Good morning, Periscope. Pastor Jennifer McAfee here, and I am joining you guys, or I guess you are joining me in the backyard of my home in the community garden that Villages Community has. And I wanted to be out here with you guys because I want to share a little bit about what I'm learning through this garden this year. I want to give a shout out to Living Martyr because he's the mastermind behind this garden, and we actually planted it a couple years ago. And this last year, it just was overgrown. We didn't really put much structure to it. The tomato plants basically took over the entire garden because none of us had a green thumb really, but we knew that if we planted it, that there would be some fruit from it. We had a ton of tomatoes and peppers last year, and so that was a lot of fun, but it was like wild. It was like a jungle of tomato plants, and it was just insane. So I pulled all of that up probably towards the end of spring, pulled it all up, tilled the soil, and then my neighbor's mom, Laura, she came over and she planted nice and neat these rows of all of these vegetables and fruits, and so it's been a great garden. We got a lot of radishes this year. There's still some carrots that are in the ground. The okra plants have been really fruitful, but the tomato plants haven't grown hardly at all this year. I don't know, I think maybe I got one tomato, which is completely different from last year. But the truth is, I haven't put a lot of elbow grease, if you will, into the garden. I have just kind of let it do its thing. I have watered it by turning on the sprinklers at night. Just a lot of that kind of stuff, but I haven't really tended to it. And so I feel like that probably has a lot to do with it not being very fruitful. Interestingly enough, the most fruitful plant that we've had is the one that we didn't plant. It actually came about on its own. It's the cantaloupe plant here. We didn't plant cantaloupe, but I guess it was in our compost that we must have thrown a cantaloupe into the compost, and over the years it germinated out here in the garden and it just sprung up this year. And so it got me thinking about seasons and how seasons work. You know, the seasons, they're predictable, they're routine. We know that there are 4 seasons every year, and by looking at nature and at our calendars and the sun and the moon, we can predict what to expect. But there's also something that we can learn in the Bible. The Bible tells us that we need to be prepared in season and out of season. I think that some of the plants in our garden this year haven't been as fruitful because I didn't prepare for the upcoming season. It wasn't until the end of spring that I actually planted plants, which was for spring. So it was much later. I wasn't preparing for summer. I intended for these plants to be fruitful in the season that they are the most fruitful in, but I didn't intend it enough to actually prepare for it. And the same as here I am, I find myself in October already, and I have done nothing to prepare this garden for a fall harvest. I should have planted during the beginning of summer for the fall. In fact, I bought seeds to plant and I just never got around to doing it. And how many of you are like that? I can be like that, not just with the garden but with life. Have every intention of preparing for the season that I know that God has for me, that is coming up, but never actually following through. And that really has been in my heart and mind lately, and it came to mind as I was preparing for this morning. You know, we've been talking about the life of Jesus, and of course Jesus was prepared in season and out of season, but particularly about Zechariah. We talked about Zechariah at the beginning of Luke and how he was a priest, and so he was in his normal routine, and it was his turn to go into the Holy of Holies, into the presence of God, and do the thing that he does. And so it was an everyday thing for him. It was his routine. But this time it was different. He went into the presence of God, and he was met by the angel of the Lord, Gabriel. And Gabriel told Zechariah, your wife is with child and she's going to have a baby. And Zechariah didn't believe him because Zechariah and Elizabeth were well beyond childbearing years, and so to him it was an impossibility. But remember, what we have learned is that impossible is always possible with God, that He makes the impossibilities possibilities, and not just possibilities, but realities. And so Zechariah had to enter a season of silence, because when his doubt and his unbelief was voiced, there's power in our words. They unleash life or death, is what the Bible tells us. And so Gabriel silenced him and said, "You will be silent during this season of culmination of this child developing, because you did not believe." And so from that point forward, Zechariah was silenced. Well, we're at the point in the story now where it's the birth and the naming of John, who is the child of Elizabeth and Zechariah. And the reason why John was created was so that he could go before the Lord, go before the Messiah, and prepare the way, prepare to be used by God to prepare the hearts of the people for the coming Messiah. And so it was a very important purpose and task. And you know what? We all have been created for an important purpose and task. And now it's not to prepare the way of Jesus, but it's to carry the good news of Jesus. But let's go ahead and read. It's Luke chapter 1, starting with verse 57. Now the time had come for Elizabeth to give birth, and she had a son. Then her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her his great mercy, and they rejoiced with her. When they came to circumcise the child on the 8th day, they were going to name him Zechariah, after his father. But his mother, Elizabeth, his mother responded, "No, his name will be called John." Then they said to her, "None of your relatives had that name." So they motioned to the father to come out and to find out what he wanted him to be called. He asked for a writing tablet, and he wrote, "His name is John." And they were amazed. Immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue set free, and he began to speak, praising God. Fear came on all those who lived around them, and all these things were being talked about throughout the hill country of Judea. All who heard about him took it to heart, saying, "What then will this child become? For indeed the Lord's hand was with him." You see, the Bible teaches us to be prepared in season and out of season. When Zechariah went into the Holy of Holies that day, he wasn't prepared for the season that God was calling him into. And so he had to be silenced during that season, because remember, there's power in the words that we speak. They will either bring life or bring death. They will either bring faith or they will bring unbelief. And so we have to measure our words, and we have to be prepared for whatever season God is calling us into, because the seasons have purpose, and the seasons will be filled with miraculous wonder if we are prepared. But if we're not prepared, then we are limiting the fruit that will come forth, not because God's not able, but because we haven't been prepared to the extent that we could be. Now, God will still work miracles, just like this cantaloupe plant came to fruition without any planning or intention on our part. It still came about because it was created to do that. And so God will bring about miracles, and he will bring about his purpose with or without our action. But God's intent for us and God's purpose for our life is to be tools in his hands to cultivate the ground, to be used by him so that the greatest amount of growth can come about through planning, through preparation for whatever season he has us in. And so that's what I'm getting from this passage and from thinking through just the season of life that I'm in right now. So I'm interested to know what you are hearing God say to you. What is God saying to you through this passage, Luke chapter 1, verses 57 through 66? What is God speaking to you, and what are you going to do about it? What season does God have you in, and what season is he calling you into? And how are you going to prepare for that? I would love for you to share with us here on Periscope, or you can visit us on our website, www.feedavillage.com. And if you could click on the Contact Us tab, I would love if you would send an email and just share with us what God is saying to you, what you're going to do about it, what season he's calling you into, and how you're going to prepare for that. Also, I want to encourage us to exercise new levels of generosity in our life through our tithe and our offering. You know, the tithe is the standard that God sets for us to meet and exceed, and it's the first and the best 10% of all that God has given to us. We give back to Him as an act of trust and saying, you know what, we know that you can do more with this 10% than we could do with the full 100%. And we're going to see God work in powerful ways when we do that. Now, that may seem like a lot to you, and I totally understand because it may be a new concept. But I want to encourage you, if that's the case, start out small. Start out, and the key there is start out. Start out small with 1% or 2%, and just trust God with that, and then and ask Him to grow you beyond that. Grow to the tithe, and then when you are tithing, allow Him to grow you into giving offerings. That's anything that's above and beyond the 10%. And you can exercise this generosity, giving back to God, by going to our website, exercise generosity, by going to www.feedavillage.com/give. And I really would love to hear what God is saying to you, and I also would love to hear about what God is doing in your life. Where do you see the activity of God unleashed in your life today, and where do you sense Him leading you? I love you. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Gather your friends and your family. Have some church as you watch this video, whether it's in your house, wherever you want to meet. But get in touch with us. And if you're ever in Fort Worth, let us know, because we would love to have you over as we have church together too. Have a great week. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye-bye.